Good morning. Welcome to the fourth and final day of the 24th World Conference of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. So whether it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, we're very glad you're here at the World Conference. How pleased I am to introduce Dr. Mark Brown and Dr. Colm O'Reilly. They will combine their areas of expertise for a presentation that provides insight into the future of gifted education. Both live in Dublin, Ireland, where Mark is the first chair of digital learning and director of the National Institute for Digital Learning, and Colm is the director of the Irish Centre for Talented Youth. Mark's ties to New Zealand and Australia are long and strong after living there until the last few years and being active in gifted in distance learning there. Colm has led the EU program to design an online program for teachers of high ability students in regular classrooms. I don't believe there could be a more up-to-date topic on the future of gifted education than Mark and Colm's talent, technology, and transversal, a three-pronged approach to benefit gifted education. Welcome, Mark and Colm.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you very much for that introduction. I think I just needed to unmute myself there, which is one of those challenges we've all experienced over the last year. Before we get underway, I just want to touch on our title in some respects, because today, Colm, my partner in crime, if you like, as we're talking here, is located in Dublin. And the Transversal, I guess, is very much at work because I'm on the west coast of Ireland in Connemara, which is quite a remote area. So isn't it amazing what technology can do and bring us all together around the world in a way that we might not have been able to do in person? We want to start with an inspiring video to begin with. Can we play the video?
CTYI program since I was 6 in 2017. And so then last summer, I done a load of different courses. And I got to do more courses last summer because, yes, I loved traveling up to Dublin, but it was quite hard practically. It was quite hard to travel up to Dublin because I live in Galway, and so it was quite hard to, be traveling up to Dublin every day. So I only really got to pick one course that I liked, and I'd have to just stick with that one, and that would be my course for the summer. But last summer, with the online, oh my God, I have bank accounts gone, I tell you that much. It was absolutely amazing. Let me just say this here, the tutors were incredible. There was no one like them. They were able to share their screens. They were phenomenal. Sometimes, because we're in our houses, so, sometimes you might hear a random dog barking, or you might hear doors slamming, or if they had like baby siblings, they might be crying. So it was the same thing, really. Obviously it would have been lovely to be in person, because, you get to meet new people. And you can kind of do it there and then, but that's just COVID for you. But forensic science, I got to rob flour out of the kitchen, which I wouldn't be allowed to do normally. I got to put reg food dye, making blood splashes all over the place, which usually I would make a mess at. And I got to get my brand new runners all muddy outside. I'm saying that I gave my mother a heart attack in the process. 3, I really liked the idea of being a doctor. And so on my school jumpers and everything, I got my labels and they said Dr. Keary. And yeah, so I quite like that. And then when I done medicine in CTYI, I just said, this has just told me that this is 100% for me. And I done neuroscience, and I actually done neuroscience twice. I done kind of the brief introduction of it, and then I done the big one of it, and I loved it. The courses, every one of them are so interesting, but you know, it kind of gives you a little boost in like helping you. So you might be like, I'm not sure, this job sounds fun, and this kind of subject sounds fun, but I'd love to try for myself. And then that's where CTYI is excellent.
So wasn't that an amazing, inspiring story of how something came out of COVID that we may not have anticipated? And we're going to tell you more about how we managed, and Colm in particular, the transition to online. Who once said that online learning is inferior to in-place or on-site learning? You only had to listen to the story there. Yet the truth is, the kind of uncomfortable truth is that prior to COVID, the dominant assumption was that a real education takes place in a physical classroom. I'm going to rely upon Colm just to change my slides, because he's got the better bandwidth than me, so he'll just flow as I'm talking here. But for many educators, learners, and parents and caregivers, right now, perhaps certainly before COVID, the traditional way of teaching in a physical classroom or in a lecture theatre, if you think, or a hall, was really seen as the gold standard of teaching and learning. And I think for many people, that's been challenged. Time will tell whether we will go back to whether things were the same as pre-COVID. The slide, I think, also captures very much this next slide, how the world has changed, because in November 2019, I was standing in front of a podium at the World Conference on Online Learning in Dublin. So that was November 2019, about 3 months before, I guess, in our part of the world, the reality of COVID hit. We had about 800 delegates, 80 countries. No one at that conference of specialists in online learning could predict, I think, what would have happened over 2020, a year that perhaps history will judge as being the great onlining of education. Certainly, this next image that I have tells you a little bit more, or the image that I'm wearing, a little bit more about my own story, because I'm standing at that podium wearing an Irish rugby jersey. Rugby is quite a big sport here in Ireland, but it's not as big a sport as it is as in my introduction, or our introduction, my original country of birth, which is New Zealand. And a good kia ora to all of New Zealanders I know. I have a good colleague, Tracy Riley, many of you will know, who first introduced me to the field of gifted education probably about 20 years ago now. I moved to Ireland to help establish the National Institute for Digital Learning. And so I'll just tell you briefly a little bit about the National Institute as Colm brings that slide up. We've been in Ireland and the National Institute for almost 8 years now, and it's a reflection of Dublin City University, which is quite a young, modern, digital era university that we established a national centre in a small country based at DCU, a reflection of how we saw the world of teaching and learning changing. So the National Institute that I have the privilege of leading, we're heavily involved in many European funded projects, but we're particularly proud of the response to COVID. And this next slide is just one example. In a second, just a little out of sequence here. I'm apologizing because I'm not managing the slides. So one slide before I come to that of Colm, if you're going backwards and forwards. I should also add to the fact, in some respects, taking a little too long to tell you my story, but being in Ireland is really important to me because my family left Ireland in 1876. So you could say it was a long homecoming. perhaps a very long homecoming. Although recently, having done a DNA test, which I would encourage everyone to do to learn a little bit about your family background, I discovered that I'm only 11% Irish. So I have to keep that a little quiet with my Irish colleagues. Colm is this is the first time I've shared this with him. On the next slide, what I was introducing a little bit early was that we're very proud of the fact that in the COVID crisis, within a matter of weeks, we were able to introduce a course on how to teach online. And in fact, we developed this course from nothing with some colleagues using the MOOC platform known as FutureLearn, one of the larger platforms. And we developed that course with colleagues in a space of about 3 weeks. And that course went on to attract over 90,000 educators. And of course, we all know that MOOCs suffer from people saying, well, people don't complete the course. 90,000 educators and about 22% completed that course. So that's a fair few thousand educators. It also challenges us, and it's relevant to gifted education, that completion doesn't always mean that you have to complete the full course. It depends what you want from it. And then on the next slide, we were very, very pleased with the opportunity we had to also contribute to helping learners learn how to learn online. I think it was quite early on that we realized that just because we'd all moved into what some call emergency remote teaching, that wasn't to guarantee that people knew how to learn online. In fact, we would even argue that learning how to learn online is almost now a new life skill. So a digital edge, essentials for the online learner, we launched in September last year. Perhaps not as international, although certainly lots of learners all around the world. About 8,000 did that course, and over 50% completed the course. So tells you something about the level of demand and the need to support people to learn how to learn online. Moving to the next slide, I think what I want to do is just argue that in many respects, the image that you've got in front of you here with the horse and the old car captures in many respects where we sort of try to graft old technology onto new technology with old ways of thinking. And if there's one thing we've learned in COVID, that new technologies need to go with new ways of thinking. And in many respects, this next slide has a very powerful image, because a lot of what might have been called emergency remote teaching adopted what I describe as the old pump, dump model of learning, essentially trying to pour large volumes of information into the flip-top heads of our learners, sort of like down a large digital pipe, expecting them to learn, let alone enjoy the experience. That online learning was very much seen about pumping information, pumping content into learners. And that's something, maybe emergency remote teaching, it was partly just by default, people went to that mode. But we know a lot about online learning. And the next slide, I want to tell you a bit of a story, because I think this story helps to capture how online learning, rightly and wrongly, is accused of different things. So what you're looking at, I think, here is the Halfpenny Bridge and the River Liffey, which divides the city of Dublin. I'm sure many delegates at the conference have been to Dublin. If you have, you'll know the river runs right through the centre, and it divides the north side from the south side. Actually, it's another use of our metaphor of transversing, that you have to transverse both sides. But in Dublin, if you're a north sider or a south sider, it defines you greatly. So the next image presents, I want to kind of just get you to imagine for a minute that travel restrictions have been lifted. They're sort of slowly lifting in this part of the world. And I want you to imagine that 2 North American travelers have arrived in Dublin, and they are going to be standing on one of the famous bridges on the Liffey, looking upstream. And they're both going to be standing in exactly the same space, but they're going to be there on the same day at different times. So here's what one of the North American tourists happens to see. This is an image of the Liffey, beautiful sparkling water, reflecting on the bright sunshine. But a little later in the day, if Colm's keeping up with my sequence here, here's what the other tourist saw, the dark side of the Liffey, because you see it's tidal. They're seeing a dirty, polluted river. Both are right. They're both looking at the same thing. And in many respects, this is a very good metaphor for how people see online learning. It polarizes people in many respects. I'm going to take this sort of story one more step and put it into the context of online learning by sharing a couple of different viewpoints or mindsets. So here we have the bright sunny water, where we have a quote from Eric Manzur from Harvard University, who claims after the COVID experience that online teaching is better. I have never been able to offer a course of the quality that I'm offering now. I'm convinced that there is no way I could do anything as close, as good as essentially what I'm doing now through online. So one side, the sparkling side. Let's have a look at the other tourist and see what their view of online and how they saw the experience. So this is another North American. For those of you from the States, I thought I would balance the ledger. And this is a genuine quote appearing in the last 2 months, in actual fact, from a North American educator from Waterloo in Canada. And essentially what he's saying is that online learning doesn't teach people to think. This got a lot of headlines in one of the popular presses, educational magazines. Essentially, he goes on to argue that a real education needs to develop proper teacher-student interactivity. Note that word proper, which can only be embodied in live practice in the traditional classroom itself, the physical classroom. So, unfortunately, actually both views fall into the trap of making sweeping generalizations. I said they're both right, but they also treat online learning as if it's one single monolithic thing. It would be like saying all face-to-face teaching is the same, even though we do tend to see it as the gold standard. We know that there is bad face-to-face and good face-to-face, just as there is with online learning. But it is a problem that still permeates through the debates about online education and in the context of gifted education in particular. So what we know from the literature is that talent combined with a transformative mindset is what adds to the sparkle of the River Liffey. Technology alone isn't going to change pedagogy. It doesn't make the difference. It's that talent and the combination with technology that really enhances the teaching and learning experience. I think this next slide also adds to the complexity of what we're now faced with as educators, because you see, when we only had a face-to-face environment to think about for education, the choices we had were not as complex as they are now. And good teaching has never been more complicated because we now have these new places and spaces for learning. I hope you can see those 4 quadrants. What I would argue is there's digital leakage across those spaces. Regardless of what you think about online education, it is a new reality for our learners. And many of them have never had anything other than a world that has that kind of leakage. So there's a rich digital learning ecology. And what we want to do in the remainder of the presentation is share with you how Colm and his team harnessed and exploited through the Centre for Talented Youth, if you like, how they transversed the new digital learning ecology during the pandemic to really take advantage of what online education could offer gifted education and gifted children. So I'm going to hand over to Colm, but first we want to share with you another short video.
I liked that we had these challenging puzzles, and in school we don't really have them, so that's what I like. They're free. The only good part about school is going home and meeting your friends. Otherwise, the work is easy and everything.
Mhm.
And CTYI is harder and challenging and fun.
Okay,
As
and
well
you
as
like
all
it?
that.
Brilliant. You like to be challenged, do you, Alex?
Sometimes. Depends what subject.
Know all the answers to stuff, but I still have to like write it down, and that takes a long time.
Yeah.
But I like in CTYI that we just skip straight to the hard stuff.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah.
In his tank, where, how would you get the humidity in the air? Like, would you use a spray, or what would you do?
Absolutely. Very good point, Finn. So yes, we use a spray bottle. So like we'll spray his tank down because it's a very tricky balance. You don't want it to be too wet because they can end up with what's called a respiratory infection. So they get an infection in their lungs, or a scale rot, where basically if their scales are too wet, so they get like infections on them. So it's a very fine balance. So we spray down his tank each day, and he has what we call a humidity hide. So we use moss. Moss is this fantastic plant that holds water, it absorbs water like this. So we spray down the moss, and it keeps that nice little area really, really humid. So if he is about to go into shed and he needs things to be a little bit more humid, he can go into his humidity hide. Great question, Finn.
Because if he lived in the desert, he wouldn't get food very often.
No, and that's a really, really good point. So Tim, normally every 3 days or so, he'll get a couple of worms. He doesn't eat too much. But what we do is, so coming up to summertime, which is basically when it would be hottest, we feed him more, say during the winter months than we do during the summer months. And during the summer, then it can go a little bit longer. And there's days he won't even take food because he's quite used to, like, even though he was born and bred in captivity, he still has his natural instincts and knows that this is the time that they don't have much food. So he's using the fat in his tail. But during the winter, every 3 days or so, and it depends then on how much he'll eat. He might have 3 worms, he might have 5 worms, and it depends. So we know he's good and healthy because basically under his armpits, he has little fat pouches. Once those little fat pouches are full and his tail is good and full, then we know he's healthy. So even if he stops eating for a little while, once they're there, you know, it's just kind of a natural thing that happens. But yeah.
I just think everyone is so kind and everyone's so understanding.
Very good, excellent. And does that help you to learn more then, Charlie? Do you think it's a nice environment?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Well, sometimes in the chat box you put in little things for us to experiment, whereas you couldn't do that if like it was in person.
Excellent. Well done, Ruben. So everyone gets to have a go at something at home and experiment.
So they just send out work to us. So this is much more thorough because you're actually explaining what you're teaching to us.
Okay.
In school, we wouldn't be doing like we wouldn't be doing like most of the classes that we'd be doing in the CTYI. We wouldn't be doing, I don't know, chemistry. We might just be doing science, and we might cover a little bit of chemistry, but like not much, not to the extent that we'd be doing here.
Very good. Excellent, Ethan.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colm O'Reilly, and I'm the Director of the Centre for Talented Youth. I'd like to thank Mark for doing such a great job and talking us through what DCU is doing in digital learning and a little bit about, you know, the complexities and the difficulties and the issues that come up when we move to online learning and what we're trying to do. So just to give you a bit of background about what we're doing at CTYI, mainly we started 30 years ago. So Ireland would have a pretty poor track record in relation to education of special needs. We really isolated those children. We weren't letting them into classrooms and stuff. And we only started rectifying that in the early 90s. And we started having more inclusive education. And at that stage, there was a little bit of mention of gifted ed. And we were very fortunate that our university decided to link up with the Centre for Talented Youth at Johns Hopkins and open a kind of a Centre for Talented Youth in Ireland. And within this, we were looking to identify and assess high ability students through talent searches, provide some courses and classes for them, also to support some parents and teachers to make sure they're ensuring the best options are available for their child. And being a university, we're doing some research, obviously, in the field of gifted education. So this is where these kind of talks come about. So we're 30 years too late for doing that. Now, I'm only joking. We've been doing a lot of research the last few years, particularly with Tracy and Jennifer Cross, the Centre for Gifted Education at William and Mary. And I think, as Julia mentioned previously, we just completed an Erasmus program with some colleagues in Europe where we designed an online course for teachers of gifted students in regular classrooms. So what does a university-based gifted program actually look like? Well, first of all, students come to the university and take college-like courses. And this is different to what they would normally do in school, in the context that they would have much more variety and much more opportunity to do subjects in more depth and to study subjects that they wouldn't normally take at school. And the age range that we would look at would be students from 6 to 17. And I think the two things that are most important in relation to this, and anyone who works on gifted programs will obviously agree, is as well as challenging them academically at a level appropriate to their ability, we're giving them social experiences so they can meet students who are similar to themselves. And I don't think you can in any way underestimate the level of power that gives the students and the level of enjoyment from meeting kids who are like yourself. That usually outweighs a lot of the academic benefits, particularly as the child gets older. And the type of subjects that we're studying, which again, fortunate that we have access to university materials and also resources in that regard, are things like aeronautical engineering, Kiri mentioned medicine there, criminology, theoretical physics, those type of subjects. And so as we've been kind of doing it for a long time, we now have a lot of students and we have a lot of people participating in the courses. 70,000 students to date have taken classes, and up to 2019, for example, we had 6,200 students. And just to give you a kind of a sense of that, each year more and more people are hearing about it, more and more people are coming on these type of programs, which is a nice thing. And obviously it means that we're doing something right, but also that people are beginning to recognize and understand gifted education more. In terms of gifted and technology and the literature related to that, it's interesting. I think it kind of supports a lot of what Mark said earlier. Like as early as 2004, I know Paula Olszewski-Kubilius and Lee there were researching gifted students on certain programs, and they were saying that they really enjoyed online courses because it gave them a bit more ability to move at their own pace, and they were able to work on extra coursework. And this was very effective for them. But we kind of somehow, I think, left that off for a little while. We didn't do too much in gifted education and online learning for a while. A study in 2012 showed that obviously it was beneficial to people in rural areas and they could get greater flexibility. But of course, the problem with rural areas is a lot to do with their connectivity related to Wi-Fi and different things. So this was a problem moving forward. I think a very kind of an influential study there was by Chen Dian Zhao, who talked about how if we use online learning effectively, we can get more people than we would have in a physical location, which makes sense. We could have better quality by enhancing the material that we can do face-to-face. And also exactly what Mark was talking about. And I think the kind of underpinning of what we're trying to say is we need these transformative new models because we need to think about these things in a different way. And I know that Joyce van Tassel-Vasca in 2021 talked a little bit about curriculum and gifted education, where she discussed how we can use these new learning tools with technology. But generally, I think there's a shortage of literature in this field, and it's something that we need to address. And I understand the main problem is, and I have it myself, is it's very hard to recruit people to do research in this field with expertise in it, because unfortunately the tech industry is paying them a lot more than we possibly could to do that. But I think that we need to persevere with it. Kind of talk to you a little bit about the challenges that we face. I talked about these wonderful numbers we had at CTYI and how well we were doing and how we were improving from year to year and increasing everything. But the problem that we had then was in March 2020, like in many other countries, suddenly our country was shut down. And there was an announcement on St. Patrick's Day, ironically, a very important day for Irish people, from our Taoiseach, who is our Prime Minister, saying that schools and universities would close for the immediate future. And we were left in a kind of a dilemma in relation to that, because we were actually in the middle of a program. And that was not an online program. We were in the middle of a face-to-face program with 1,000 students. We also were planning on having a 1,200 student residential summer program 3 months later. And I don't know if anyone remembers the pandemic. Gosh, it feels like we've been in it for about 20 years at this stage. But if anyone remembers the start of it, a lot of people had predictions that it would all be over by May of that year, which unfortunately did not prove to be true. So again, we had this problem that we were actually unable to access the university during this period between March and May. The university was closed. We were instructed not to go to the offices and stuff. So we had lots of difficulties. And even from a kind of a refund perspective, we usually are, people are happy and they like the courses. Suddenly, like, we'd only refund 6 a year. Now people were saying, is it on, is it off? And our system was not set up to cope with this. So there was, like, I think a lot of people who run gifted programs think, or externally who don't run them, think the problems are mostly in terms of curriculum and staffing and recruitment. Actually, a lot of the problems are logistical, administrative ones. And this was highlighted a lot during the pandemic at the start. So our first efforts at what we tried to do that was, we had 50 classes, as I said, about 1,000 students. And at this stage, like Zoom and these type of platforms are very much in their infancy. And we had very little access to knowing, like, I think our big problem was, what technology do people have at home that we could access and send down to them and that they could understand? I think it was only latterly that people started using Zoom very effectively for family celebrations and for quizzes and for different things. And we decided that'd be a very useful teaching tool as well. But at the time, we didn't really have that. So we started with YouTube videos. So we got all our teachers to prepare these YouTube videos, and we sent them out to students during the allotted time of the class. And then the teachers would be available to answer some questions using an interactive blog. And it actually was pretty successful, more than we thought it was. Some of the teachers came up with some very innovative and very excellent videos and were very good at it. And what we did was to kind of soften the blow for parents who weren't really used to this, was to offer them access to every video from every class rather than the ones that their child had signed up to. Because a lot of the feedback we were getting at the time, and I know this will be familiar to anyone working in this field, is that the parents were saying the students were incredibly bored at school, that there was very little online learning happening. The parents were teaching themselves at home and the kids were very bored. So the access to all this material from us was really, really useful and helpful. But the problem we found was obviously that some people were much better at it than others, particularly those who were adept at the technology, whereas we'd hired a load of people who may not be as used to it, and their subjects may not be conducive as much to learning online as other ones. And this was a challenge. So we learned a good few lessons from that, and we decided then going forward we would use Zoom as a platform for the classes. And the most important thing in relation to that was to give your staff full training on Zoom. It's a pretty easy to learn platform. It's pretty good for anyone who understands and knows how to do online teaching. But it's very useful to have staff trained to understand what they're doing and to use it effectively and well. And also then the parents, if they choose to send the kids to it, would understand what we were trying to use and what platform we were doing, rather than changing halfway through. In relation to that, the consistency was better. And we also talked about what would be the optimal times for these courses and how could we expand certain subjects to make them more online friendly. And the positives and the negatives we found from this rebuild were, the very good things was, we were really surprised at the high level of participation amongst the students. And I think that this again goes back to stuff that Mark was saying, that the students are driving this and they're kind of more adept and used to the technology than we are. And they're actually quite comfortable with chatting and learning online, more so than maybe we are as educators and teachers. And in that regard, we were surprised at how much participation and interaction there was. And the teachers themselves who were good at it really kind of used a lot of good online teaching tools to help their curriculum, to make the classes more interesting and to make it as interactive as possible. The problems we had were, again, we're always trying to, and it's very kind of thing that we're trying to recreate this live experience when actually it's a different experience. it might not say, I don't think exactly as Mark was saying, can we say it's better? Can we say it's worse? I don't know, but it's definitely different. And I think that trying to make one the exact same as the other is a mistake. And that was one that we made early on because we were constantly trying to make it the same so that they wouldn't feel it was different when it actually was. And obviously the practical courses, some of the science lab courses, the engineering courses, initially were very difficult to run in an online environment. So we did improve the system moving forward. We integrated the application system, and that was really important. I think that once you have people signing up, they really need to have a way of signing up for courses and classes, which we didn't have previously. It helped us to do this, and it helped us to put in a system in place, which obviously we will use moving forward. The feedback we got from parents, teachers, and students, this is quite a good one, on what timings work best for different ages. And I think, look, as a parent of a teenager, I can tell you, they certainly do not want classes at 9 a.m. And then also, having previously been a parent of a 6 and 7-year-old, they absolutely love having classes very early in the day to keep them occupied and stuff. So we're trying to move class times around to what was going to work best for everyone. And we trained the teachers much better in the platform and in the online learning skills, and they improved as it was. And also then we had much more choice over what courses we were giving and what teachers we were hiring. And that was very, very helpful in relation to how we plan and do things. And as I'll put in the next slide, we use tools to aid online experience. And I'll talk a little bit about how we tried to recreate the social experience. I think most of you, anyone working in online, will be familiar with all these teaching tools. PhET simulations are really good for science in relation to that. It's a really free tool that you can use, and you can do kind of mini experiments and different things, which are very interactive and very good for teaching online. Obviously, Kahoot, I think, is pretty well known now at this stage for little quizzes. We had been using them previously anyway in class when we were face-to-face. Very good for an online. Spiral, obviously, from an assessment perspective, is great. Things like Padlet, where you can use and brainstorm by having little notepads and stuff. All of these ones, look, they're designed for simple use. I think that if you're a good teacher and you look at these closely, you can definitely aid and make your class better by using them if that's what you want to do. You don't need to use all of them at the same time in every lecture, but I think if you plan and think about it, you can make some good strides in relation to this. Some examples of curriculum. I think I'm not going to be brave. I've kind of learned how to click out, and I can show you the websites of these kind of four, but as I'm kind of on a roll here, I'll continue talking. And look, if you want to kind of have a look at the curriculum, I'm sure the slides will be made available to people afterwards. And also then you can contact me and let me know. I can send all this stuff to you, so it's no problem. But just kind of talking about this thing, Brian Tyrrell is one of our teachers who taught game theory, and he has an amazing set of notes for game theory, which is linked to little strategy games so students can play themselves through a website. Linked to articles on strategy and game theory that they might be interested in, and also to other university-based applications around game theory. It's an amazing kind of a little resource, which is simply put together, which pools other resources, but in the same location, which makes it very easily and accessible. Brian shares this with all his students and with anyone who's interested, and it's a really, really good thing. Brian's a PhD student in Oxford, to give him his credit due, and obviously a former CTYI student, so he knows kind of the mindset of the children that we're looking for. Machinelearning.co.uk is a really good site for teaching kids how to learn to program and stuff like that. Beyond Labs was a good one. Now, this was something that we did. As I said, we were talking about the difficulties with practical applications of online learning in what we'd normally do in a lab and how to recreate that in a classroom. It was very difficult. A lot of it was we sent out materials. We do stuff for them to experiment at home. I know Kerry was talking about it, but some of them are just not difficult to do. Whereas Beyond Labs is a very good group. They have experiments done online and simulated and put together. So it's a paid service, but we used it quite effectively, and it was very helpful, particularly for older students in classrooms. And Robotify, I'm glad to talk about these guys. These guys are how we sometimes teach robotics, and they're actually a startup company that came out of DCU. A few lads who were still in college at 1920 had this idea to design and program robots. And initially they did it in a way that they had physical robots that you would use online to program and move. But obviously the pandemic inspired them to have everything move virtually to online. And we run a lot of robotics courses whereby we get the kids to program and move virtual robots. And those guys are expanding and doing Mars missions and different stuff. And it's a nice little website, and they're a nice group of guys who put that together and very in touch with the type of material and students that we would work with. I said I'd talk about this, and I'm delighted too, because I think that as I said, the social kind of development of high ability students is really important, and very much something that was difficult during COVID times, particularly when they didn't have access to their friends. So what we tried to do was to replicate a social activity program, which we would normally do in a face-to-face process. So we ran them after class in the summer program, and we got them to sign, we got our staff members to sign run activities after class for a smaller group of students. And then we bring them all together for a Friday for a large kind of an activity that they could all do together. And they'd sign up for them in advance, and we'd get some feedback, and we'd see what they liked and didn't like. And the attendance was really good. We were really surprised that obviously they were really missing this social kind of experience. And 60% of the ones who had signed up for the classes all signed up for these social activities. And the kind of things that worked well from a home setting, as you can see, pet appreciation. I think you saw one of my colleagues, Megan, teach with a snake around her neck there. She teaches a lot of zoology and animal behavior courses, but she kind of had this idea that, we could have students showing their pets and doing stuff. Debating, obviously, is something that they can do online. And a talent show, where they could all perform and do things that they were good at. Usually they would come into DCU to do that, but then we're doing it from the place of their own kitchen, which worked really well. Students that they felt less intimidated speaking and performing at home than they might do in person, so that was good. What we kind of slightly changed it this summer, we said students were a little bit tired after class, and we moved activities to an evening setting to give them a break in between. And one of the big successes was a disco that we had for all the students, where they dressed up and listened to songs that they really like, and recreated their kitchen into a dance floor. And this was hugely successful, looking at this on Zoom. Unfortunately, we just can't share photos of that due to privacy, but it was a very nice experience. This one's a good one. Just at the end of the program, for one of the engineering courses, they had their own virtual graduation on Minecraft. Minecraft is a very useful educational tool for people who don't know that, but there they are lining up for graduation. So my last slide is just kind of talking about 2021. 2021, we had no face-to-face classes. So we did some Saturday classes for primary and secondary school students, which were very effective. I think about 2,000 to 2,500 students participated. Really positive feedback, worked really, really well. We run an early university entrance program where the students come to campus one day a week. They couldn't do that, but they did this online this year. And the applications and the feedback were higher even in an online capacity than they were face-to-face, particularly for students who may have difficulties actually, as Kiri mentioned, getting to campus and doing it. So more people were able to participate. We started a new program with my colleague Leanne, Early Research Network, where we had students designing their own research project with a virtue and an idea that at the end of it, they would be able to present a paper or a poster and teaching them research skills. And it was really, really effective, and the students really enjoyed it. Even the challenges of doing it from home were difficult, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to get them on campus at least once a month. But all of them stuck with it, and they came up with some great projects at the end. And the summer program, as we talked about, we tried to do some social stuff. We did some academic things. And I think it was much more successful than the previous year, where we'd learned lessons related to online learning. I'm going to hand you back to Mark now. He's going to do the conclusion, and hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, Mark.
Well, thanks very much, Colm. As you can see, Colm is really the person that is at the key face of what you've been hearing about. And I hope I've been able to frame some of the wider conversations around online learning. The slide here about unboxing, I guess, is a craze on the YouTube. If you're not familiar with unboxing, people get paid a lot of money to unbox things. But what you've heard about today in terms of the CTYI program, it's not something that you can just unbox and think it's going to happen because it looks good. And I think this is also a lesson about the new technology that we have. Really what you've heard about today works because it's wrapped in some amazing talent. It's got a pretty good investment in infrastructure, a rich learning culture, but not to be overlooked, just as importantly, a really supportive institutional culture that encourages us to transverse and break new ground. And I want to kind of come back to that ecology metaphor. Remember those 4 spaces. In many respects, and I saw some good questions coming through. Someone talked about blended and why we tend to treat things as black and white with face-to-face and online. What I think we probably need to be talking more about is a hybrid. So borrowing that sort of ecological approach, more of a deliberate and intentional hybrid approach where we're building back better in a way that's fitter and stronger than it was before the pandemic. And off script, if I was to be slightly critical of the concept of blending, perhaps before COVID, blending was putting everything into the blender. Hybrid is being very careful and quite scientific about the way we blend things. Maybe sometimes less is better than too much. But moving on, just to kind of wrap things up here, what I really think, and I touched on the importance of mindsets before, and this is about talent with the right mindset. You heard me talk about, and you saw and heard Colm give really first-hand examples of when you match that talent with the mindset and the right kind of ethos, a spirit, an ethos of being a future maker, willing to really push new boundaries in education. And today, digital needs to be at the heart of that because that's the world we live in, but that's not just the reason, just because it's convenient and we live in the digital world. The combination can really make the experience so much more powerful, authentic, and enriching. So going to the next slide, now is not the time to simply try to bolt on new technology to teaching. And some of you may have seen this sort of metaphor previously in education. The tendency when we talk about new technologies, if you come back to the introductory slide where I had that horse and the old automobile, is to be very rather substitutional focused, if you like, more just to supplant what we did, not to think in a much deeper, more reimaginative sort of way. And I guess that's my challenge for gifted education, is it's time to unbox, reimagine, and transform gifted education for what will be the next normal. So returning to my Kiwi roots, you can take the person out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the person, as they say. This is the traditional haka that I hope many of you may have seen, at least on television. And the challenge is, let's build back better in a bold way. And bold is an acronym here, which means it's going to be a bit blended. It's going to be a bit online, and it's probably going to be infused with the digital. So I'll stop on that note. I think we've left a reasonable amount of time to engage with the questions that have come through, but I really encourage people to talk with Colm. He's got the first-hand experience of what it was like and where we're going to next. So thank you.
Thank you both very much for very provocative thoughts on what gifted ed is going to look like in the future. I want to start with a question that you talked about teaching teachers to teach online, and learners need to learn how to learn online. So let me ask, what does that look like for learners? What do they need to be able to do that's different from being in a classroom?
That's a great question, and you know, I'm not sure that we fully have the answer, because when we designed a course for learners to learn online, one of the things we're actually very proud about that course is we recruited a team of learners to co-facilitate the course. And we worked on the assumption, if you remember the slide I had about the pump, dump model of education, we tried to design a course that was very much more socially based, where the knowledge and expertise came from the community of learners. So we had a team of 6 learners, DCU students, who co-facilitated the course, and we really leveraged their experience as online learners and telling us what was important to them, including the tools that they used, because most of us would use a virtual learning system or a virtual learning environment, an LMS, depending on which part of the world you're in. But we know that our learners use so many more tools, and you saw some of them that Colm was introducing, but there are so many things. Bo, to more directly answer your question, one thing we did do is we structured the framework of the course around the European Commission's lifelong learning framework. So we did put something around it in a theoretical sense. And the course was structured around ways of thinking, ways of working, tools for working, and tools for thriving. But ultimately, I think we are still very much in a co-constructed, co-designed environment here. And that's just a lesson that, let's not think we know everything.
So what we learn, we must share with each other. Is that the message going forward on that? You mentioned that the one question in the chat is about the black and white approaches to online learning, that it's very one way or it's very another way. They either are for it or against it. So what strategies do you suggest that would help us ameliorate that situation and start to look at the hybrid model that you're talking about?
Yeah, I can try that one maybe. I think that we're definitely moving towards that now as we kind of move out of COVID-related regulations and restrictions. I think that we went, as Mark was saying, from this on-site, in class to suddenly out of sight, out of class. And I think that what we have to have is something as a blended between the two of these. And this will be very helpful. But it's like I was saying, we have this early research network program where students go online twice a week and we discuss projects, and then they do them together as much as possible online. But what will greatly enhance that will be their opportunity to maybe go to campus once a month, where they can meet each other and have face-to-face discussions and then go back more productively online to what they have to do, rather than always being one thing or the other. And I think that these type of programs, which are built in to have components of both attached to them, are very useful and helpful. And look, most of this is driven, Mark is the expert in these areas in relation to research and how this works. But I do know our university, we're very fortunate, is that we're very pioneering in pushing this method forward in as many programs as possible. So I think we're replicating that a lot with gifted children, but it does work, I find, and I'm sure Mark might be able to add to that.
Another question kind of follows up with that one. How do you assess the effectiveness of the program on the gifted and talented child?
I think that that's a difficult question because, I think that sometimes the parameters of success are different for different people. I would definitely think participation in a gifted program, learning curriculum that's well advanced for your age group, and having access and being able to understand it and contribute to it while meeting other people similar to yourselves is as effective an outcome as you can possibly get in these things. And we can be over kind of the emphasize, well, what did you actually learn on this program? Because for different people, that's so different. And I think that we would have students who are incredibly highly academic and focused and really want to go to the top prestigious college. And we'd have others who are really low, would be very, very low production before they come here, very disinterested in a lot of stuff. They have very different goals, but we're trying to engage them in the same environment and put them together to create positive outcomes for both. So I think that to keep outcomes as variable as possible is really important.
2 or 3 questions are asking or addressing, what does it take to qualify to participate in the program, Colm?
Usually we're looking at students who are in the top 5% academically. Now we use an assessment tool for that, but we have flexibility in a lot of programs related to motivation letters from the students themselves, related to teacher recommendation. We obviously don't just rely on one assessment criteria, and we've many different courses which have many different requirements. And as much as possible, we're trying to cater for all bright students in that regard.
So would it be possible for a child who's very interested in a topic but doesn't qualify to participate?
It is possible for them to do that at the moment. We may have different levels of participation. So you might have some students who are scoring off the chart and have miles of experience in these subjects. They can be paired with other students at that level. People at a starting level who may not have completed an assessment can take, as one of the students referred to, a beginner course related to that. And then maybe if they want to continue or do stuff, they could be assessed subsequently. But we try not to turn anyone away for that reason.
Another question asks, what's next in terms of technology and approaches to learning? Any thoughts moving forward?
I think I'll come in on that one if you like. It's an interesting question because I wouldn't want people to go away thinking that technology is just a tool. Whilst I may have conveyed the importance of pedagogy and the importance of talent, the tool itself does change the nature of the interactivity and the experience. I've just finished writing a piece for the European Commission actually on some of the big trends in digital education. And so we're seeing a new generation of immersive technologies coming, virtual technologies where we may be able to be in virtual worlds. In fact, some of these prototypes already exist. Some are being used even for online conferences where you mirror like you're walking down the corridors of a real conference hotel or somewhere, and you're having those social interactions in much more authentic ways than maybe we did with things like Zoom or Teams, where we still tended to talk down the pipe at people. So I think we're certainly not finished yet. New technologies are going to come, but ultimately that pedagogy and the talent and the thinking about it, and my unboxing metaphor, just because it looks good doesn't mean we should use it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Mark there, because I think that this is the next step for education in gifted ed. I think that what people are saying to me and what we're getting feedback is like, why can't it be like an interactive museum? Why can't it be like, now the technology for those things are very expensive at the moment, but I think what Mark's alluding to is that the more people are producing them, these are now going to be accessible in classrooms in the future. And I think that we need to be skilled to be able to learn and avail of these to make our teaching better. We can't ignore that. And I think that that's at the moment exactly, I agree exactly what Mark's saying. We're kind of teaching down the laptop to them, whereas we should probably be interacting a little bit more using the technology as it develops. But sometimes we're a little bit behind on that. But I think that the way we're moving, the students themselves are expecting it. So we have to kind of keep up with it.
Thank you ever so much for the comments, the information. It has been a wonderful look into what is present and what is the future of gifted education. Thank you both.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks
for inviting us.